Welcome to the WUN podcast sessions, a series of podcasts with WUN partners, exploring issues within the utilities sector. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing the survey results from the Women in Utilities Network white paper called Unconscious Bias in the Utilities Sector. What is the reality? The report presented the key findings from a survey, which was commissioned to gain an understanding of how women are being treated in the energy and utility sector and whether their experiences demonstrate unconscious bias. Before I invite our guests to introduce themselves, I just wanted to explain what we mean by unconscious bias. The report did actually neatly sum up the term as a mental shortcut that can lead to often incorrect snap judgments. The mental shortcuts may be based on gender, race, or other individual characteristics and can often lead to judgments about a person's competence or character, or preconceptions about their interests and behaviours. This mix of judgments and decisions will undoubtedly influence behaviours in the workplace that can quickly become particularly harmful and obstructive to a woman's career. The report assesses the impact this is having on the industry. But before we delve in, I wanted a quick word from you all from the start. I'll just provide you with some of the headline stats. And obviously throughout the conversation, we'll delve into a little bit more detail. So there's some killer stats that we're going to be talking about today from the report. I'll just give you a gentle reminder of them. Almost a third of women who responded say that they are looking to leave in the next 1 to 3 years. 50% feel differently due to gender. 84% feel that women are generally given admin or organisational tasks over leading and challenging tasks. 41% feel that their voice isn't heard at meetings and that they are interrupted while speaking. 49% feel that their opinion is not valued as their male counterparts, and 46% hesitate to give their opinions or share ideas. So I am joined today by not one, not two, but three of our WUN partners. And I wanted to ask you all, do you think you have ever been guilty of unconscious bias or have witnessed unconscious bias? I should have actually introduced you all. Today I'm joined by Lorna Millington from Cadent Gas, Darren Jeffrey from SmartestEnergy, and Adam Clarke from TEC. So who'd like to go first?
I think first of all, those statistics are obviously shocking and eye-opening to get that feedback and insight around how women are feeling in our sector. Clearly, we need to do something about it. But from my perspective, careers are journeys, and my career has certainly been a journey over the last 30 years. And I think there's always learning opportunities, and we're slap bang in the middle of one right now. And it did give me an opportunity to reflect and also to talk to women who I work with in my role currently. And I have been guilty on that reflection. And the one that came to mind, I've got a leadership team that has a gender mix, probably 60-40 male to female. And we run weekly leadership meetings. And it was always me giving the minute taking and the action taking to one of the women in my team. And when you hear how women are feeling, that made me reflect on that. Now, my decision making is there to be reviewed and reflected by myself. And why did I choose that person? I chose that person because she was very well organised and she would always deliver those minutes on time. But I didn't reflect and think, would the men in the team be of the same ilk? So that was a lesson for me to learn. And actually what I did as part of that was then change it so that we had a chairperson rotated on a monthly basis, and they would obviously take the minutes and the actions. But that was one that came to mind for me.
Lorna.
Well, I suppose there's always that observation, because of it being the WUN network, that women don't do this to them others. But actually, yeah, we're all guilty in one way, shape or form. And yeah, I've done it. I think there's, for me personally, it's sometimes the length of time you spent in a job or a career, or your age, that makes you think that you are no better and potentially don't listen. Or I'm very guilty of talking over people, but I'm aware of it. And I do catch myself now, but as a youngster, much less able, or maybe not so self-reflective as to catch it at the time. So yeah, those are my moments of thinking, yeah, I've done it. And still probably will.
What about you, Adam? I know that you and I were actually at the launch event and panellists when we released the report. And I think the conversation on the day was that we're all guilty of unconscious bias. And I guess for you, have you A, been guilty of it, or B, perhaps had the opportunity to reflect over the last 6 months from being a panellist when we launched the report?
Yeah, very much. And I think picking up on the same thing as the guys there, I think the report's really, it's a nice, gentle introduction. We need to remind ourselves that unconscious bias has got us as a human race to where we are today. It allows us to make snap decisions, and that's allowed us to evolve and to progress as a society. But I think picking up on your point, Darren, I think it's great that we're now spending some time just testing some of those assumptions, because when we reflect, actually, would we make the same choice again? Similar to you, I've done exactly the same. That person who's best at organising, so happens to be a female, so unfortunately that person's always been given the role. Actually, is there a learning opportunities for other members of the team to upskill? Because if it were a finance person that couldn't add up, you'd upskill them. So I think for me, this unconscious bias in the report encourages us just to take a moment to just reflect on some of the decisions we're making. And I know we're going to come on to this, Lucy, but if we were to slow down in some of our decision making and not always make snap decisions, and to sometimes question our initial thought and see things from a different perspective, I do wonder if there's an opportunity to address some of the quite shocking stats that you shared in the report. Yeah,
and I think those examples just outline those barriers that are clearly still there around psychological safety, the challenge, the confidence to be able to feed back, and that just links into culture, which we'll obviously be talking about later on.
I want to come back to you, Lorna. Within the report, and I'm going to read a quote from it, the credibility crisis, are women being seen but not heard? So 2 of the quotes from the report say, I say something, it's ignored. A man says the same thing and it's a great idea, and he gets the credit. And this has happened too many times to list. My opinion will generally be sidelined and reappear as a male colleague's good idea a few days later. So does any of that resonate with you, Lorna?
Yes, it does. I've probably not experienced some of it as much, but I've had 27 years, same company. Probably that length of service has diminished that happening to me so much now. Definitely when I was younger, there was, the being ignored. Ignore is probably the wrong word, but just not really, acknowledging that there may have been something credible in what you say. And that sense of, well, I won't bother next time. But I think I've been lucky. I haven't had the male colleague rework my idea and be accepted as a great plan, and mine not. That's maybe just a bit of luck, but it's there. It is definitely there.
I wonder, Lorna, because I think something else the report states is that the respondents were feeling less confident and less, assured in working in the industry. So, whilst this reflects the views of women, I think it would also reflect the view of both gender types. If you're less confident, if you're less likely to speak up and shout and be less reflective, then I think quite often that will be the case. And I've definitely observed it as somebody who's generally more reflective, likes to think before I speak. it's happened to me, and it's like, that was my idea. That's what I told you about before I came into the meeting. But you're just better at projecting your voice. You've got a nice deep voice. You come across incredibly authoritative because, in the 60s, that's how, industry was led. We've got all these sort of stereotypes we need to break through. It's that idea of, again, I keep coming back to time, but just allowing people that time to reflect and to think about the response. And actually addressing it when somebody who is louder and bolder steps in. It's just, just give this person a moment.
Yeah, and it's sometimes the environment's different. I thought about the fact, had it happened to me so much recently, and not in a one-to-one environment, it's very rare to feel it or see it in those types.
Yeah.
Whereas meetings, quite often the only female within a large group of men. I actually get sometimes the opposite, which is everyone remembers my name. I'm in a sea of male colleagues where it becomes quite hard to remember everybody. You get a credibility sometimes that actually outweighs, and you're put on the spot in places. So it can actually be quite the opposite happening, but it still gives you the same uncomfortable circumstance for somebody who isn't strong and comfortable to wish they weren't even in that environment to begin with. So, it's probably both parts that can occur that can really make people struggle to find that environment worth being in.
Do you think it's changed? You've said 27 years, yes. Lorna.
Yes.
One company.
Yep.
Cadent Gas.
Yep.
You mentioned the other day, we've often found ourselves in rooms, whether that's in a meeting virtually or at a networking event, where we've almost gravitated towards each other because we've sort of been in the minority. Do you think? I mean, how did you start your career? Are you're an engineer, right?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I started out doing network planning for the gas network, worked through to varying variants of that, and now in the innovation space. And yes, it's changed. There's more women in those environments than there were when I started, but it isn't guaranteed that you see that every day at all events. I can still be the only female in a room for a meeting quite, as regularly as I was before. But the difference is it's probably more women across more job types than I would have said when I first started. And it doesn't matter in some ways. The numbers are irrelevant. It's actually, do you feel like you're equivalent to the others in the room? And that's come with age and stature. And I do think staying in one place has elevated, because it's hard for people to dismiss your time served, but it doesn't give you the same credibility as a man who's been in 15 years or less.
How have you navigated through those challenges, though, Lorna, in that time? What have you leveraged and what have you latched onto in order to get to how you're feeling now in that environment?
I think it's a combination. I think as a youngster, you're naturally not as shaped. Your resilience to those environments is a little less. So I was lucky enough to find people around me, both male and female, that help you get that confidence and feel the resilience to be able to go back and do it again. And the other part is that I think the environment has changed. Yeah. It definitely has over 27 years, to the point where I can no longer think about it. I don't have to think about it. And it'd be nice that everyone else could be in that same circumstance.
Has that helped you become a mentor for others?
Yeah, I think obviously, but it obviously is a bit blasé, because I think even by not doing anything, people watching and seeing helps. Yeah. So it isn't necessarily that, the mentoring in ways people would necessarily think. And I do think the networks, the like-minded people help. Having an environment to discuss scoping strategies, because this is a two-way street. It's a changing culture, but you also have to learn your own level of resilience in a career. We all do. That's not unique to female or male. Our ability to keep coming back when it gets hard and all the other things you need to make a career work for you. It just has to be doable enough that you keep sticking with it rather than feeling you have to leave. You know, those stats about leaving the industry.
Is there anything that I will come on to you, Adam and Darren, because it from the report, it suggests that it isn't just women that are leaving the industry or feeling some sort of semblance of unconscious bias. But Lorna, is there anything from sort of a Cadent Gas perspective that they've put in place around unconscious bias, inclusive leadership, et cetera, that you've been through yourself?
Yeah, it came back to me that I actually did unconscious bias training back in 2015. We're talking 9 years ago. You know, this isn't a new thing to talk about, but it's probably a bit more obvious to people that it exists and that it needs some attention. The whole concept of ED&I has snowballed, I would say, in the last decade, and all of the things around networks and just having the right cultural acceptance of the variations that we all bring, and that it's all important to making a business and a whole industry workable. Now, this can't be the same people turning in the same ideas and expecting to be better. We've got a whole raft of reasons why that can't be the case. And being around innovation, you learn that you can't be the same, do the same, and expect a different outcome.
But I'll pick up on that as well, Lorna. I couldn't agree more. It's, we the fact that a third of respondents are looking to leave the industry within the next 18 months, exactly at a time when the energy industry is transforming. And, we haven't yet got all of the answers to some of the existential challenges we face. So this is exactly the time where we need to be retaining diversity of thought, diversity of leadership, just differing views. This is absolutely the time where we need to be innovating. And the fact that female respondents, and I think male respondents as well in the survey, are thinking of leaving. And also, if we're not creating a culture across the industry where people's views are respected and thought of, then we are going to just continue to pump gas, pump electricity in the same wires in the same way, and we know that isn't the solution that's going to get us to where we need to get to. So this is a very real existential threat to the sector, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think that statistic was the real eye-opener for me. And I think it would be good to drill down further on it for sure, because is it an inclusion issue that's driving it across diverse, and in this instance, obviously we're talking about gender, or is it, going back to Adam's point, cultural leadership behaviours that's driving that quite alarming statistic? It's one that we could probably debate for the next hour.
Is it Lorna and I? What do we need to fix? Is it the women? I don't think so. I think it absolutely what you've said. It's the culture. I just am a little bit interested, before we go into some sort of practical solutions. I'd just be interested in, I guess, Adam and Darren, the kind of male perspectives on this around inclusive leadership, and what would motivate you to get involved in the conversation, whether that's personally or, professionally.
Do you know what? I think it's, results orientated. It's probably around the same time. It must, I guess unconscious bias was, that's when it came to the fore, maybe around 2015, 2016. That was the first time I've even heard the phrase. And whilst I'd agree, it's, it's very well known across the sector, I'm not sure it's, until you're taught it, you don't know it. It's not something, unless the syllabus has changed. It probably has in 20 years, but I don't think it's taught in schools.
I'll be completely honest with you. I only knew it was a thing really this year, and through my involvement with the Women in Utilities Network, the invitation to be a panellist after the launch of a report. I seriously hadn't really heard the term.
But a bit like Darren's example, I think having had the training and then trying to do something slightly differently and then seeing the benefits of doing things differently, that encourages them to try things differently again. And of course, we know when you try and do something differently, it doesn't always work. But on those instances where it does, it tends to be exponential. So again, the example of, administrative tasks always to that same person, divvy that up, and then that person's then given time to contribute more to that meeting. I mean, that there's a really simple example. Similarly, challenging the way that you recruit. And then looking at even at the shortlisting process stage, looking at the range of candidates you get when examining applications differently, you get different results. And guess what? You get a different workforce, which ultimately over time delivers better results. It's the results that encourage me to stay involved and interested in this subject.
Yeah, I think the challenge from a training perspective, I hate sheep dipping people through training. And I think with this particular subject, there's an element of that. And I think...
how effective do you think?
Well, for those that are already converted, like Adam and myself, hence the reason why we're here today, we understand it and we get it. For those that aren't, Lorna mentioned listening. Listening to real life scenarios and examples of how women are feeling, I think has to be embedded within the training piece. So how training is delivered, the method and the ways in which it's delivered, but ensuring that you've got that engagement, then that sort of initiates the next steps, which is around collaborative leadership, where it gives an opportunity then to be heard. So the previous example of I've come up with an idea and somebody's stolen the idea and it happens to be a man, that will start to reduce because everybody is bought into it. But I do believe that currently, from a training perspective, there is this sheep dipping element of, right, we're going to put you through unconscious bias training and therefore everything will be solved. That's not the case. And that's why forums like this are really, really important so that we get it out there, but you've still got to get to the gap in the target audience, which is clearly there.
I don't think unconscious buying training alone is enough to improve workplace diversity or any kind of long-term change. Going back to what you said, Adam, we're all working in the energy industry. We have that sort of 2050 or is it 2030 target against a backdrop of net zero. And if we're not careful, we need people that you mentioned innovation earlier, Lorna. We need a set of people with diversity of thought. It kind of brings me on to how do we then, as a collective, and the organisations that you work for, begin to shift this culture to combat unconscious bias and promote inclusivity through inclusive leadership? If we want to support that more inclusive culture, what practical actions? And a lot of this for me, you mentioned it earlier, is about psychological safety. Without the threat of getting diversity and inclusion fatigue, have we gone too far? There are people within the industry that say, there's too much. Yes, we know we're in the middle of an energy transition. We know that we've got targets to meet. We know we've got an ageing workforce. We know we need to create that are potentially leaving, whether it's male or female. We know that through the innovation, and it's going to require different skills from different backgrounds. What can we do?
The important thing, I think, to release and resolve some of those psychological safety issues, creating diverse community groups helps. And that's important because everybody feels in those community groups that they are being listened to and they have the opportunity to speak up. And that happens. The challenge then is, how do you broaden that across your group? Because people will feel safe in talking about their experiences within those community groups. And that, I think, then links to the other side of this, which is leadership and behaviours, and we've spoken about that previously. So making sure that and I think this is where for leaders, it's not just about IQ, it's about EQ now, and emotional intelligence, and making sure that you have that within your leadership teams, and that then people start to listen and learn to what's happening and being discussed within those community groups. I think that's really, really important.
And is there anything you're currently doing at SmartestEnergy?
Yeah, so two years ago, I think COVID drove a lot of action, to be fair, around starting with well-being, because we were all working in our homes and the dynamics of how we work changed. So there was a big focus on well-being and mental health. And that then opened up more around the EDI program that we wanted to deliver. So we created a program which is called, our EDI program, which is called Smartest Balance. And we started to build those community groups. There's a steering committee that supports that, of which I'm vice chair for. And it was always looked upon it to start off with because the chair and myself are white, middle-aged, heterosexual men. But when you reflect on that now, we're talking about allyship and challenging the status quo around all this. That helps support that in my view. And I think it's, in that 2 years, we've made a lot of progress, and it links to the whole cultural thing around creating awareness. So I think, that certainly helps.
Certainly do agree that the network approach helps give everyone a safe place. And I think it supports training because it's that ability to go and then reflect in an environment that's safe and comfortable. But then I think the key piece is to slow down and reflect at the time rather than later. We all have the ability and responsibility to watch for this behaviour when it manifests and then do something about it. This is putting it into action, not just listening and saying, oh yeah, I understand what I'm doing, but I'm not necessarily expecting to be either called out on it or to change. Because, this is about giving the responsibility to everyone, because this is something that everyone can be prone to, both to do and to receive. It's giving that ability for it to be comfortable enough to go, I'll call this out. And it doesn't have to be then. It can be later. It can be out of sight of everyone else. It doesn't have to be about, name and shame and make people feel uncomfortable. It's reminding people, did you see what you did? Did you think about what you did? This is that whole point of reflection and the slowing down and taking time, even in an environment that wants to quicken to a pace that's unmanageable.
I was gonna say, it's difficult. How do we speed up?
But slow down. But isn't that the statement? To speed up, you do slow down. You have to be mindful of what you do so that it's useful and worthwhile doing rather than just knee-jerk and reactive and inefficient. We have to be the most efficient we can be to achieve what we've got to achieve. So to be in that perfect spot where we've got everybody mindful and capable and delivering, look what we could achieve in that environment.
Lorna, I totally agree with that. I think one of the biggest benefits of the training is that it makes picking up, and I've been picked up on bias. It makes it less aggressive. To be called racist or sexist or misogynist, that's a very strong accusation. And of course, that's not the accusation you're making, but you're saying that remark you made could be perceived. If somebody's been through the training, I think it just softens it. They may not agree, or they may take a different view, but it almost gives you that authority to deliver the message, but also the authority for the person to then receive it and then to process it and do something with it. And on the slowing down before you speed up, I think if we're brave enough to pick people up on inappropriate behaviour, which then makes the next 5 meetings that bit slicker and quicker, and also encourages those that were maybe put off by an off-colour remark, it will make for a better culture and a more collaborative environment where people are comfortable calling each other out in a respective way. Again, nobody wants to be, accused of something that inappropriate. But at the same time, the training really helps people just to feel comfortable in calling out those behaviours, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think it's not just about unconscious bias training. Going back to my point earlier, it's around leadership and behaviours training. So it's almost values, actually.
Yeah.
Values and behaviours will drive that. And, I think we all have to be very open to the fact that candid, constructive feedback is actually a learning opportunity. And that could be related to this subject or something else. And as humans, sometimes we take any criticism badly in our personal lives and in our working lives. And it's cutting through that piece. And again, that links to culture. And I think, we've started to do that through the appraisal process with 360 feedback, and I'm sure other people do that. But 360 feedback sits behind an open and honest conversation to a certain degree. So there's that whole piece around psychological safety again. And I think it will take a while, to really get to where we need to get to.
To have the confidence to be able to, like you say, not just about unconscious bias, whether you disagree with a certain way the business is going, or you've got a difficult conversation to have with your own line manager or leader. It's a very difficult, because you don't want to necessarily be black mark, or your opinion or your voice isn't necessarily heard because you're disagreeing with the sort of strategic direction of travel of a...
It's about relationships, and it's about trust and integrity. And, you can relate to it in your personal life. If I cook something at home and my wife doesn't like it, she'll tell me and I won't cook it again. And you've got to try and break it down into those sort of real life examples, I think. But it is around trust and building those relationships for sure.
Yeah, knowing that you've been heard isn't necessarily about you getting what you asked for. It is actually about that acknowledgement that, yes, you might have offered a solution that can't be taken forward for good reason, and here are your reasons, rather than just saying, yeah, that's not going to happen. Because it is that communication,
absolutely.
But it's being given enough to know that it meant something. It's to feel valued, is to see value being given back. It's not just to take, it's to be given.
Yeah. That acknowledgement almost.
Can anybody give me any examples of where they've perhaps had a difference of opinion, let's call it that, in a professional environment where you've felt safe enough to kind of speak out, and you felt that you have been heard? That's probably a very difficult question.
I think it happens more than you would probably think about, because, your whole career is about expressing opinion, because that's what you do. That's what you're paid to do. I think if you're lucky, it's 50-50 to whether everything, 50% of your ideas move forward. But actually, it's just simply knowing that it actually landed in an inbox and it got read, or, that somebody actually took the time to come back to you and say, that idea, it's not going to give you or it's not going to give the business what it's looking for, therefore it's not going to go forward.
Yeah, Lorna mentioned resilience earlier through her 27 years. And I think with that experience, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. But I think, again, it's going back to that safe environment where you can come up with ideas, and not always going to be the ones that you may feel that this is the best idea I've ever had. But actually, when you then get the collaborative feedback that, okay, you then understand that maybe it's not the right time, or it needs to be tweaked in a different way. That's down to influencing skills and passion for what you believe in. But I think in terms of that, it's going back to what we spoke about earlier. It's that experience of that situation and learning from it in terms of, okay, why wasn't that accepted last time? How do I change my pitch maybe, or the way I approach it and support it with the relevant benefits that are really tangible. For me, that's more of a coaching thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a clear role, I think, for coaching and mentoring. Final reflections, really. Have you any advice? Any advice to any sort of emerging leaders, I guess, that are perhaps new entrants into the wonderful world of energy and utilities, around how you create that culture, how you create that level of trust around people being able to speak up? You know, I'm a big fan of psychological safety, and because one leads to the other, you've got culture which needs to be set by the organisation. You've got a set of leaders that need to be inclusive. Innovation, transformation requires diversity of thought. So yeah, final reflections. I mean, I'll come to you, Lorna, first. There's obviously something within the industry that you like because you've been within it for 27 years. Do you ever see yourself leaving Cadent Gas or leaving the industry? Dare I say it?
Oh, maybe at retirement. But I think it's don't be put off by trying. You know, I've seen, from before 2015, the network idea was tried. It didn't really land and continue, but it wasn't a bad idea. It's the combination. Maybe the culture wasn't ready. Maybe the people weren't ready. It's lots of reasons. Keep trying. I say resilience because I mean it. You have to have tenacity to keep coming back. A good idea at some point will fly. And, cultures don't happen in a day. No. They don't happen in a week or a month or a year. They need time. They need nurturing, as any, learning experience does. You can't demand it, and you certainly can't expect it. You need to embrace it and embody it, and just make sure that you don't lose your sight, because the rest will follow. It might just take time.
Yeah, and Cadent itself, throughout your career, has gone through massive transformation programs and organisational restructures, etc., etc. So I guess we have to be mindful of that, don't we, as well, when we're sort of talking about culture, because it's kind of start. We're heading in this direction, and now we're stopping, and we're being sold off, and we're going to be called this, and now we're doing this. And within the energy mix, is it hydrogen, and the feasibility, etc., etc. So it's that constant.
But you can't lose sight of what you want.
No, don't take your eye off the ball.
It is.
No.
It's like all the other stuff's the business. The business needs to evolve to keep good at what it needs to do. But the people who are the business at the end of the day just need the environment to continue to give them the nurture and the love and protection they need to do what they need to do.
And I'd pick up on that as well. I think you're absolutely right. Time is the thing. In industry and business, there are times where you just have to make a snap decision, and it's you live and breathe on that decision. But not all decisions require a snap. We're encouraged all the time. Decision. Actually taking some time, encouraging that person who's been a bit quieter. What's your opinion? Understanding why that person has been particularly quiet in this meeting. I think when you have the benefit of time, delivers better solutions. I then also think that then informs future snap decisions, because where you are, give yourself the time to look back on a decision that you've made, some of the assumptions you made at that time. When you have the time of challenging those assumptions, that next snap decision, I dare say, will be more balanced. 50-50, you're right. 50% of the time you get them right, 50% of the time you get them wrong. But it's giving that time, and also giving our team members that time to understand the benefits of unconscious bias training, understanding and respecting other people's views. I think that for me is the key ingredient.
Darren.
Well, yeah, I agree with everything that Adam and Lorna have said. And I honestly feel that we're gaining traction and momentum around this. And obviously podcasts like this and working with WUN really sort of, from my benefit, helps me see that. And I think as a male in the industry, I'm obviously very passionate about changing those statistics and reviewing that and seeing that the progress through that process. We've talked about behaviours and values. We've talked about training, but I think we need, from my perspective, more male allies to support this. Going back to the point that I made earlier around communities and having those diverse communities, how do we actually then pull those discussions out into the workplace? And Adam's right. It's about, when you're in those situations, taking more time, reflecting and ensuring that everybody has had a voice, or at least if they haven't, asking why, because that just opens up those honest conversations that we were talking about. And it has to be from the top down. And, people in those positions need to be able to explore networks like WUN and other networks like, I've been talking, as I mentioned to yourself, Lucy, Men for Inclusion, and just reading more and learning more about the subject, spending time to actually read what's happening out there, looking at surveys and listening around that piece, and then relating it back to your own workplace. I'm a big believer that what we're trying to achieve here is that sort of culture of belonging. And I think we've got a great load of talent out there that needs unlocking, and the value that would add.
Okay, I'm just looking at the clock, and I think as much as I'd love to continue the conversation, I think we're going to be booted out pretty soon. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining me for the candid discussion around the impact of unconscious bias and the need, I think, clear need for inclusive leadership. We've covered quite a lot of ground in a relatively short space of time. I've jotted down just a few key points from the discussion. So we've highlighted the pressing issue of women leaving the industry and how unconscious bias can manifest in workplace cultures, often affecting women's career development, advancement, and satisfaction. And I think going back to the intro, that killer stat of them leaving the industry, which has sort of hit home, I think, for all of us, because it stifles the innovation that we need. I think the discussion has emphasised the need for the inclusive leadership and some of the practices that we've discussed, and that can only help address the biases and create a more supportive environment for women. We have shared some actionable strategies for leaders, suggesting that open dialogues about bias can create that flexibility. We've talked about COVID as well, and that's still very much in our lives, to retain that talent. And we've also touched on a call for that cultural shift within organisations, not just your own, urging leaders, I guess, to prioritise inclusivity and to actively work against those biases to create a more equitable workplace. So overall, I think this podcast has underscored the importance of addressing unconscious bias and promoting inclusive leadership to retain women in the energy and utility sector. Thank you.